You think your choices are yours, but most of them were decided long before you became aware of them. You probably think your choices are yours, but your brain made most of them long before you noticed. Imagine yourself standing in a high-end boutique or perhaps scrolling through a sleek digital storefront. Your eyes land on a watch, a piece of software, or a vintage leather jacket. The price tag is staggering, $5,000. It's absurd, an insult to your financial sensibilities. But then your eyes drift to the item immediately to its right. It's similar, perhaps slightly less ornate, priced at $1,200. Suddenly, that second item doesn't just look affordable. It looks like a bargain. You feel a pulse of satisfaction as you consider the deal you found. What you don't realize is that the $5,000 tag wasn't put there to be bought. It was put there to live in your mind. It was an anchor, drops deep into the silts of your subconscious, dragging your perception of value exactly where someone else wanted it to go. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're watching from and what time your mind decided to question itself tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's step quietly into the hidden architecture of the human mind. The world you navigate is not a collection of objective facts, but a series of comparisons. Your brain is a magnificent machine, but it is also remarkably lazy. It seeks shortcuts or heuristics to conserve energy. One of the most potent shortcuts is the anchoring effect, a cognitive bias where we over-rely on the first piece of information offered, the anchor, when making decisions. This isn't just about sales. It's about how your reality is constructed by the hands of others. When a negotiator opens with an extreme demand, they aren't just being greedy. They are colonizing the mental space where the final agreement will live. They are setting the center of the universe, and no matter how much you push back, you are still orbiting their sun. Consider the mainstream psychological fact of System 1 thinking, popularized by Daniel Kahneman. This is your fast, instinctive, and emotional brain. When you see that initial anchor, System 1 accepts it instantly. It doesn't do the math, it feels the weight. By the time your slower, more logical System 2 wakes up to analyze the situation, the damage is done. The anchor has already adjusted your internal scale. You believe you're being rational as you negotiate down from a high starting point, but in truth, you are merely dancing within the cage that was built for you the moment the first number was mentioned. There is a surprising hidden behavior insight here. Anchoring works even when the anchor is completely irrelevant to the decision at hand. In a famous study, participants were asked to spin a wheel of fortune that was rigged to stop at either 10 or 65. Afterward, they were asked to estimate the percentage of African nations in the United Nations. Those who saw the number 10 gave an average estimate of 25%, while those who saw 65 gave an average estimate of 45%. A random number on a wheel, a piece of data they knew was meaningless, physically altered their estimation of global geopolitics. Maybe this is happening to you right now. Think about the last time you walked into a dealership or signed a contract. Was the first number mentioned based on reality, or was it a ghost meant to haunt your logic? Psychologists still debate whether the anchoring effect is a result of insufficient adjustment or selective accessibility. But the outcome remains the same. You are being pulled. You assume you are standing on solid ground, but you are actually tethered to a dock you didn't choose. This silent manipulation thrives in the shadows of your ego. We like to believe we are immune to such simple tricks. We tell ourselves we know the true value of things. But value is a phantom. It is a social construct refined by the deliberate placement of high-stakes suggestions. When a realtor shows you a run-down house at an inflated price, before showing you the house they actually want to sell, they are using the first house as a sacrificial lamb. The decay of the first property makes the second one shine with a brilliance it hasn't earned. You aren't buying a home. You're buying an escape from the first anchor. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once suggested that there are no facts, only interpretations. In the realm of behavioral psychology, we find that these interpretations are often handed to us on a silver platter, disguised as our own conclusions. You ignore the subtle cues, the way a menu lists the most expensive bottle of wine at the top, or how a charity suggests a standard donation of $50 before you can even think of $5. These are not mere suggestions. They are structural supports for your thoughts. You trust your instincts because they feel like they belong to you, but who planted them? Every day you move through an environment designed to trigger specific responses. You are a participant in a grand experiment where the variables are controlled by marketers, politicians, and even friends. They understand that if they can control the starting point, they can influence the destination. This is the uncomfortable truth behind human behavior. We are remarkably easy to steer if the person holding the wheel is quiet enough. As you sit there, listening to the hum of the fan, realize that your mind is constantly searching for a baseline. It craves a reference point to make sense of the chaos. Without an anchor, you are adrift in a sea of infinite possibility, which is a state the human brain finds terrifying. Other people know this. They provide the anchor so you don't have to find one yourself. They offer you the relief of certainty, and in exchange, they take a small piece of your autonomy. You assume you've analyzed the situation. You think you've compared the pros and cons. But did you define the range of those pros and cons? Or did someone else define the boundaries of the playing field? The invisible mental traps are often the most effective because they don't look like traps. They look like helpful starting points. We must ask ourselves, what anchors are currently weighing down our lives? Is it the salary you think you deserve because of what a colleague earns? Is it the level of happiness you expect because of a curated feed on your phone? These numbers and images are the first things you see, the primary data points that calibrate your internal compass. And once the compass is calibrated to a false north, every step you take, no matter how logical it feels, leads you further away from your own authentic path. This is the hidden architecture. It's not about being forced to do something against your will. It's about being guided to want exactly what someone else wants for you, while you smile and call it a choice. The anchoring trap is only the beginning. It is the first thread in a web of social and psychological influences that define the limits of your world. As we move deeper, you might start to wonder if there is any part of your self that hasn't been shaped by the quiet suggestions of the crowd. You might believe that your convictions are forged in the fires of your own private contemplation, but more often than not, they are simply echoes of the people standing next to you. Think of the last time you stood on a street corner and saw a small group of people looking up at nothing in particular. Your neck muscles likely twitched with a reflexive urge to join them. You didn't ask why. You didn't evaluate the sky for anomalies. You simply looked because they looked. This is the social proof illusion, the quiet, desperate mimicry of the crowd to survive a psychological void. Your brain is wired to believe that if many people are doing something, it must be the correct thing to do. In the prehistoric past, this was a survival mechanism. If the rest of your tribe started running, you didn't wait to see the predator. You ran or you died. But in the modern world, this ancient hard wiring is a back door into your mind, left wide open for anyone who can manufacture a crowd. Whether you are choosing a restaurant because the parking lot is full, or buying a product because it's a bestseller, you are outsourcing your critical thinking to a nameless collective. This is a mainstream psychological fact, often referred to as informational social influence. We look to others to provide a cue for the correct behavior in uncertain situations. But the tragedy of the human condition is that the people you are looking to for guidance are often looking right back at you for the same thing. This creates a feedback loop of hollow certainty. It is how trends are born from nothing, and how irrational panics take hold of entire nations. You assume the crowd has information you lack, while the crowd is merely reflecting your own expectant gaze. There is a surprising hidden behavior insight known as pluralistic ignorance. This occurs when a majority of group members privately reject a norm, but go along with it because they incorrectly assume that everyone else accepts it. You see it in meetings where no one asks a question because they don't want to look stupid, assuming everyone else understands, when in reality, the entire room is drowning in the same silent confusion. You are trapped in a prison of your own making, built from the perceived judgments of people who are just as terrified of being judged as you are. Psychologists still debate whether social proof is an evolutionary necessity for group cohesion or a vestigial bug in our mental operating system that leaves us vulnerable to mass manipulation. Maybe this is happening to you right now. As you listen to these words, are you evaluating them based on their intrinsic logic? Or are you looking at the view count, the likes, or the comments to decide if this information is valid? We treat numbers as a proxy for truth. If 1 million people believe a lie, our brains struggle to categorize it as anything other than a fact. This is why astroturfing, the practice of creating fake grassroots support for a cause, is so effective. If a corporation or a political entity can simulate a crowd, they can hijack your sense of reality. They don't have to convince you that their idea is good. They only have to convince you that everyone else already likes it. Remember that false certainty from earlier, the way the anchor made you feel like you had a grip on value. Social proof is a different kind of anchor. It's a horizontal one. It pulls you sideways toward the mean. It's the laugh track on a mediocre sitcom that tricks your brain into finding a joke funny even when your intellect knows it isn't. You ignore the canned nature of the sound because your System 1 brain hears the social cue of laughter and releases the corresponding chemicals. You are being remotely controlled by the recorded joy of people who might have been dead for decades. This is the uncomfortable truth. Your individuality is often a thin veneer over a deep, shivering need for conformity. We like to think of ourselves as the protagonists of our stories, the lone wolves, the independent thinkers. But true independence is exhausting. It requires a constant, high-energy surveillance of one's own biases. It is far easier to slip into the slipstream of the majority and let the current carry you. Dark persuasion thrives here. When a salesperson tells you that most people choose the premium package, they are not giving you a recommendation. They are threatening you with social exile. They are implying that to choose otherwise is to be an outlier, a deviant, or simply wrong. The philosophy of human nature suggests that we are social animals to our very core, but that sociability is also our greatest flaw. It makes us susceptible to groupthink, where the desire for harmony overrides the realistic appraisal of alternative courses of action. You trust the crowd because the crowd feels like a shield, but a shield can easily become the walls of a cell. You assume that there is safety in numbers, but numbers can just as easily lead you over a cliff. The invisible mental traps are laid with the bricks of common sense. And what is common sense, if not the consensus of the unthinking? Think about the influencer culture that permeates your digital life. Why do you find certain aesthetics appealing? Is it because they resonate with your soul? Or because you have seen them mirrored back at you 10,000 times across a glowing screen? The architecture of social media is designed to weaponize social proof. Every like is a tiny grain of sand on the scale of your perception. Eventually, the weight of these grains tips your internal balance, and you find yourself wanting things you never wanted before, thinking thoughts that aren't yours, and adopting a lifestyle that is merely a composite of the most successful profiles in your feed. Maybe this is happening to you right now. Perhaps you are realizing that your favorite brand, your political stance, or even your sense of humor is a curated collection of social signals you've picked up to fit in. This realization is unsettling because it threatens the ego's need for uniqueness. But to see the manipulation is the first step toward resisting it. You must recognize that the voice of the people is often just a sophisticated recording played by those who understand the mechanics of your insecurity. The social proof illusion is a shadow play. It relies on the dim light of your own self-doubt to cast large, imposing figures on the wall. But if you turn around, if you look at the source of the light, you see that the figures are small and the stage is empty. You are not just a member of the crowd. You are a creator of it. Every time you mindlessly follow, you add your own weight to the trap, making it harder for the next person to escape. We are all holding each other in this invisible prison, waiting for someone to be the first to look away from the sky. You are standing at the edge of a decision, peering into the abyss of what if, when suddenly the air grows thin. A timer appears. A banner flashes. Only 2 left in stock. A voice tells you that this opportunity, this specific life-altering chance, will vanish in exactly 47 minutes. In an instant, your blood pressure spikes, your pupils dilate. The calm, analytical part of your brain, the one that was weighing the pros and cons of the purchase or the commitment, is shoved into a dark closet and locked away. This is the scarcity trigger, a biological hijack that turns you from a modern thinker into a desperate scavenger. They create a ticking clock for your pulse because they know that when things are rare, we stop asking if they are good and only ask how we can get them. Scarcity is perhaps the most primal of all psychological levers. It is a mainstream psychological fact that humans are more motivated by the fear of loss than the prospect of gain, a concept known as loss aversion. When something is abundant, we feel in control. We can take it or leave it. But the moment it becomes limited, we perceive a loss of freedom. To regain that freedom, we must possess the item. This is the psychological reactance theory. We find a restricted object more desirable not because of its utility, but because its unavailability is an insult to our autonomy. You aren't buying the product. You are buying back your right to choose it. There is a surprising hidden behavior insight regarding how scarcity affects our cognitive bandwidth. When we experience a sense of not enough, whether it is time, money, or social connection, our brains enter a state of tunneling. We focus so intensely on the immediate scarcity that we lose the ability to think long-term or consider the broader consequences of our actions. It's as if the mind's peripheral vision is cut off. You see the limited edition label, and your world shrinks to the size of that one object. You ignore your mounting debt. You forget that you already own 3 similar items, and you disregard the fact that the scarcity is often entirely manufactured by a marketing team in a windowless boardroom. Maybe this is happening to you right now. Think about the digital world you inhabit. Why do certain apps use streaks that disappear if you don't log in every 24 hours? Why do sales platforms show you how many other people are looking at the same hotel room at this very second? They are inducing a state of artificial panic. They are simulating a world of dwindling resources to trigger your ancient survival instincts. Psychologists still debate whether this obsession with scarcity is a fixed evolutionary trait or a culturally reinforced behavior intensified by the hyper-consumerism of the 21st century. Regardless, the effect is a paralyzing loss of rational agency. Remember that false certainty from earlier? The way the anchor gave you a fake floor and the crowd gave you a fake wall? Scarcity is the fake ceiling. It presses down on you, creating a sense of claustrophobia that demands immediate action. It is the oldest trick in the dark persuasion playbook. If you can't convince someone with logic, frighten them with the prospect of never. When a recruiter tells you they have other candidates in the final round, or a romantic partner suggests their time is becoming limited, they are throwing a switch in your limbic system. They are making themselves or their offer a rare resource, knowing that your brain will automatically assign it a higher value. This is the uncomfortable truth. Your sense of value is a liquid that expands or contracts based on the container of availability. We do not want things because they are inherently precious. We think they are precious because we might not be able to have them. This is the philosophy of human nature at its most cynical. We are creatures that can be driven to madness by the sight of a sold-out sign. It reveals a hidden motive in almost all our interactions: the need to win, to be the one who grabbed the last scrap before the door slammed shut. Maybe this is happening to you right now. You might be holding on to a job you hate, a relationship that has soured, or a project that is failing, simply because you view the alternative as a scarce opportunity you can't afford to lose. We are often more afraid of the empty space than we are of the bad fit. The invisible mental traps are baited with the word exclusive. We want to be part of the few, the elite, the chosen, not realizing that exclusive is often just a synonym for isolated. You assume your urgency is a sign of passion. You think that because you want it now, it must be important. But urgency is the enemy of wisdom. The most significant decisions of your life should be made in the cool shade of reflection, not in the scorching heat of a countdown. When someone limits your time, they are stealing your ability to think. They are forcing you to operate in a state of cognitive poverty, where the only thing that matters is the win. Consider the Black Friday phenomenon, a mass psychological breakdown where civilized people trample one another for a slightly cheaper television. This isn't a failure of character. It's a success of engineering. The scarcity is so intense, the window so small, that the human brain reverts to a state of primal competition. In that moment, the television isn't an appliance. It's the last kill of the winter, and everyone else in the store is a rival predator. You trust your feeling of need. You ignore the fact that need is often a manufactured sensation, a phantom limb created by the absence of a want. The architecture of the mind is such that we can be made to feel deprived of things we didn't even know existed 5 minutes ago. All it takes is the suggestion that they are running out. As you listen to the soft background hum of your room, ask yourself, what are you rushing toward? Are you running because you have a destination, or are you running because you heard a door clicking shut behind you? The mind is not always your ally, especially when it's convinced that the world is a place of permanent shortage. Sometimes, The greatest act of rebellion is to simply sit still and let the exclusive offer expire. To realize that the clock is a prop, the urgency is a script, and your pulse is being played like an instrument by someone who knows exactly which strings to pull. You are sitting in a quiet cafe when a stranger approaches and places a small, handcrafted flower on your table. A gift, they say with a disarming smile, to brighten your day. You didn't ask for it. You don't particularly want it. But the moment your fingers brush that inexpensive token, an invisible tether is snapped into place. 10 minutes later, when that same stranger returns, asking for a donation to a cause you've never heard of, you find your hand moving toward your wallet. Your logic screams that the flower is worth pennies and the donation is $10. But a deeper, more ancient part of your brain is screaming louder. It tells you that the scales are unbalanced. It tells you that you are a debtor. This is the reciprocity debt, a psychological mechanism so powerful that it can force you to trade your freedom for a favor you never even desired. Reciprocity is a mainstream psychological fact, often cited as one of the fundamental pillars of human civilization. In his seminal work, Robert Cialdini identified it as a rule that compels us to repay what another person has provided us. In the ancestral environment, this was the social glue that allowed humans to share resources and survive lean winters. If I give you part of my hunt today, I do so with the unconscious certainty that you will feed me tomorrow. To fail to repay a favor was to be labeled a moocher or a parasite, a social death sentence in a world where survival depended on the group. Today, that survival instinct has been weaponized into a tool of dark persuasion. You are being gifted into submission every time a company sends you a free sample, or a colleague does you a small favor before asking for a massive shift in your project's direction. There is a surprising hidden behavior inside regarding the unsolicited nature of the gift. The rule of reciprocity does not require that you ask for the favor for the debt to take hold. In fact, the debt is often more potent when the gift is unexpected. When someone does something for you unbidden, they seize the moral high ground. They define the terms of the exchange. You are left in a state of psychological discomfort, a cognitive dissonance, where you view yourself as a fair person, but you are currently in the red. To resolve this inattention, you will often agree to a repayment that is vastly disproportionate to the original gift. You trade your time, your money, or your loyalty just to stop feeling like you owe someone something. Maybe this is happening to you right now. Think about the free content you consume, the complimentary consultations you attend, or the trial periods you sign up for. You assume you are getting something for nothing, but in the architecture of the mind, nothing is ever truly free. Every gift is a psychological invoice. Psychologists still debate whether reciprocity is a purely altruistic trait that was co-opted by modern society, or if it began as a calculated form of reciprocal altruism, where the benefit to the giver always outweighed the cost. Either way, the result in your daily life is a constant, subtle pressure to comply with the requests of those who have invested in you. Remember that false certainty from earlier, the way the anchor defined your price and the crowd defined your reality? Reciprocity defines your obligations. It is a leash made of silk. It doesn't feel like a command. It feels like a choice made out of kindness or decency. But when you look closely at the motives of those providing the favors, the kindness often looks more like a transaction. This is the uncomfortable truth behind human behavior. We can be bought for the price of a cup of coffee or a polite compliment, if the timing is right. Maybe this is happening to you right now. You might be staying in a job because your boss took a chance on you, even though the environment has become toxic. You might be maintaining a friendship that drains your energy because that person was there for you years ago. You are treating your life like a ledger, and someone else is holding the pen. The invisible mental traps are often built out of our best intentions. We want to be good people, and the masters of manipulation know exactly how to use our sense of morality against us. You assume your gratitude is an authentic emotion. You think that because you feel a need to give back, it must be coming from a place of genuine connection. But true generosity does not come with a hidden if. When a favor is used as a lure, it is no longer a gift. It is a weapon. The philosophy of human nature suggests that we are remarkably predictable in our need for balance. If someone tips the scale, we will do almost anything to level it again, even if it means acting against our own best interests. Consider the soft sell in modern marketing. A brand doesn't just sell you a product. They provide value through newsletters, tips, and community. They build a reservoir of goodwill, a massive standing debt of free help. When they finally ask for the sale, you don't feel like a customer. You feel like a friend returning a favor. You ignore the fact that the value was carefully calculated to trigger this exact response. You trust the relationship, not realizing that the relationship is a structural component of a sales funnel. As you sit there, perhaps feeling the weight of the favors you haven't yet returned, ask yourself, who is truly in your debt, and who has made you a permanent resident in theirs? The mind is not always your ally, especially when it's being manipulated by a sense of unearned guilt. Sometimes, the most honest thing you can do is to accept a gift and give nothing in return. To recognize that an unsolicited favor is not a contract, and that your autonomy is worth more than the fairness of a rigged game. The invisible architecture of social debt is designed to keep you moving in a specific direction, toward yes. It plays on your fear of being seen as ungrateful or selfish. But remember that the person who gave you the flower or the free sample didn't do it because they cared about your day. They did it because they cared about your response. Once you see the hook inside the bait loses its flavor. You can choose to step out of the cycle of debt and realize that yourself is not a commodity to be traded for the appearance of politeness. You are walking down a crowded city sidewalk when a man in a t-shirt and jeans steps into your path and asks you to cross the street to help him move a heavy crate. You likely keep walking, offering a polite apology, or perhaps ignoring him entirely. Your brain assesses him as a peer, a stranger with no more claim to your time than anyone else. But imagine that same man is wearing a crisp navy blue police uniform, or perhaps a white lab coat with a stethoscope draped around his neck. When he points toward that same crate and gives the same instruction, your legs move before your mind can even formulate a question. You don't check his credentials. You don't ask for a legal justification. You obey because the symbol of authority has bypassed your critical thinking and issued a direct command to your nervous system. This is the authority mask, the surrender of your logic to a confident uniform. The tendency to obey authority figures is a mainstream psychological fact, most famously demonstrated by Stanley Milgram's experiments in the 1960s. Milgram showed that ordinary people like you, would administer what they believed to be lethal electric shocks to a screaming stranger, simply because a man in a lab coat told them, "The experiment requires that you continue." It wasn't because the participants were sadistic.
It was because the presence of an authority figure shifted them into an agentic state.
In this state, you no longer see yourself as responsible for your own actions. Instead, you see yourself as an agent for carrying out another person's wishes. Your conscience doesn't turn off. It merely transfers its loyalty to the hierarchy. There is a surprising hidden behavior insight regarding the trappings of authority. We are not just influenced by actual power, but by the mere appearance of it. In a study on jaywalking, researchers found that 3 times as many people would follow a man across the street against a "Don't Walk" sign if he was wearing a high-status business suit compared to when he was dressed in casual work clothes. A suit, a title, or even a specific tone of voice can act as a psychological shortcut. We assume that those who look the part must know something we don't. We treat status as a proxy for competence, and competence as a proxy for the right to lead. This is the invisible mental trap. We mistake the mask for the person behind it.
Maybe this is happening to you right now. Think about the experts you follow online or the gurus who dictate your lifestyle choices. Are you listening to their advice because it is logically sound, or because they have a high follow count and a professional-looking backdrop? Psychologists still debate whether this reflex toward obedience is a byproduct of childhood conditioning, where survival depended on listening to parents and teachers, or a deeper evolutionary necessity for maintaining social order in large groups. Either way, the result is the same. You have a blind spot for anyone who carries the symbols of power. Remember that false certainty from earlier, the way the anchor limited your range and the reciprocity debt tightened your leash. Authority is the master switch. It can override your moral compass, your common sense, and even your physical senses. When a financial expert tells you to invest in a volatile asset, or a health influencer tells you to try a dangerous diet, your brain stops looking for red flags. It assumes the responsibility has been delegated. You ignore the uncomfortable truth that titles can be bought, uniforms can be rented, and confidence is often just a mask for a lack of data.
This is the philosophy of human nature at its most vulnerable. We crave leaders because the burden of absolute freedom is heavy. Deciding for oneself requires a constant, exhausting appraisal of reality. It is far more efficient to find a figurehead and let them carry the weight of the why. Dark persuasion thrives on this exhaustion. A manipulator doesn't need to be right. They only need to appear certain. In a world of ambiguity, certainty is a form of authority. When someone speaks with absolute conviction, we reflexively lean in, hoping some of that clarity will rub off on us. Maybe this is happening to you right now. You assume that your doctor, your lawyer, or your government representative has your best interests at heart because of the role they inhabit. But roles do not have hearts. People do. And people are subject to the same biases and pressures as you are.
The invisible mental traps are often woven into the very fabric of our institutions. We are taught to respect the office, but the office is often used as a shield for the incompetent or the predatory. You trust the confident voice. You ignore the fact that the most dangerous people in history were often the most authoritative in their presentation. The architecture of your mind is designed to seek out a hierarchy. If you don't find one, you will often invent one. You might even find yourself elevating celebrities or influencers to the status of high priests, granting them the power to tell you how to think, what to value, and who to hate. This is the authority mask in its modern, digital form, a decentralized priesthood of verified accounts. As you sit there, perhaps reflecting on the figures you've allowed to govern your thoughts, ask yourself, what would you do if the uniform was removed? If the doctor stripped off the coat? If the expert lost their title?
would their words still hold weight? The mind is not always your ally, especially when it's looking for someone to blame for its own mistakes.
We obey so that we don't have to be wrong alone. But the safety of the group is an illusion if the leader is blind. The invisible architecture of power relies on your cooperation. It requires you to keep your eyes on the mask and never on the eyes behind it. To break the spell, you must realize that authority is a social contract, not a natural law. You have the right to ask why. You have the right to demand evidence. And most importantly, you have the responsibility to remain the primary occupant of your own mind. Sometimes, the greatest act of intelligence is to look at the man in the lab coat and realize that he is just as lost as you are. He's just better at hiding it. Imagine you are a patient in a sterile white room, and a doctor presents you with two options for a life-saving surgery. For the first option, he looks you in the eye and says, "There is a 90% survival rate." For the second, he pauses and says, "There is a 10% mortality rate." Mathematically, these statements are identical. They describe the exact same reality, the same risk, and the same outcome. Yet your heart reacts differently to each. The word survival feels like a warm hand on your shoulder. The word mortality feels like a cold shadow in the corner. In that split second, your entire moral and physical compass pivots based on a single word. This is the framing effect, the art of changing the lens to dictate the choice. They don't have to change the truth. They only have to change how the truth is dressed. The framing effect is a cornerstone of behavioral economics and a mainstream psychological fact. It suggests that our choices are influenced more by how information is presented than by the information itself. This is a direct challenge to the idea that humans are rational actors. If we were truly rational, the framing of a problem wouldn't matter. Only the data would. But we are not data processors. We are storytellers. We are highly sensitive to gain frames and loss frames. When something is framed as a gain, 90% survival, we become risk-averse, wanting to lock in that positive result. When something is framed as a loss, 10% mortality, we become risk-seeking, desperate to gamble our way out of the negative outcome. There is a surprising hidden behavior insight in the way framing affects our perception of fairness. Consider a shop that sells a product for $20. If they offer a $5 discount for using cash, you feel like you've won something. But if they charge a $5 surcharge for using a credit card, you feel like you're being punished. The price difference is the same, but the surcharge frame triggers a sense of injustice that the discount frame avoids. Dark persuasion thrives in this linguistic theater. Political spin is nothing more than professional-grade framing. A tax cut is a loss of services depending on which lens you are forced to look through. You aren't being told what to think. You are being told how to see, which is far more dangerous. Maybe this is happening to you right now. Think about the products in your pantry. Is that yogurt 10% fat, or is it 90% fat-free? Is that news story about the arrival of 10,000 migrants or the refuge of 10,000 humans? The data point is the same, but the frame prepares your emotional response before you even finish the sentence. Psychologists still debate whether framing works because it triggers different emotional anchors or because it limits the mental accounting we do for a problem. Regardless, the result is that your logic is a prisoner of the vocabulary used to describe it. Remember that false certainty from earlier? The way the anchor gave you a starting point and the authority mask gave you a leader.
Framing gives you the walls. It defines what is inside the problem and what is outside. If a salesperson frames a car purchase around monthly payments instead of the total cost, they are narrowing your field of vision. They are hiding the mountain of interest behind a small, manageable hill. You assume you are making a prudent financial decision because the frame is small enough to fit your immediate comfort. You ignore the larger reality because it wasn't included in the picture. This is the uncomfortable truth behind human behavior. We do not see the world as it is. We see it as it is described. This reveals a hidden motive in almost every communication you receive. The person framing the information is trying to pre-install a conclusion. They understand that if they can control the reference point, the rest of your thinking will follow a predictable path. In the philosophy of human nature, this is known as perspectivism, the idea that there is no objective truth, only a series of perspectives. But when those perspectives are manufactured by others, your truth becomes an artificial construct. Maybe this is happening to you right now. You might be judging your own success based on a frame provided by your social circle or the media. Are you behind in your career, or are you building a diverse range of experiences? The facts of your life haven't changed, but the frame determines whether you feel pride or shame. The invisible mental traps are often built out of adjectives. We focus on the efficient process and ignore the cruel outcome. We applaud the bold move and forget the reckless risk.
You trust your gut feeling. You ignore the fact that your gut is highly susceptible to the affect heuristic, the tendency to make decisions based on how you feel about a word or an image. The architecture of your mind is designed to seek the path of least resistance, and gain frames are the ultimate psychological lubricant. They make the choice feel easy. They make the yes feel like a reward. But every frame is a boundary. To see what is being hidden, you must step outside the frame and look at the negative space. You must ask, what is the version of this story that uses the other words? As you sit there, listening to the steady rhythm of the narration, ask yourself, how many of your strongest opinions are just reactions to a clever frame? If the war on drugs had been framed as a public health crisis from the beginning, would your stance be the same? If global warming stayed global warming instead of becoming climate change, would your urgency be different? The mind is not always your ally, especially when it's being seduced by a comfortable narrative. The invisible architecture of framing is the most subtle form of control because it feels like your own internal monologue. It's the difference between spending time and investing it. It's the difference between working and building a legacy. By choosing the frame, others can dictate your emotional state, your priorities, and your ultimate actions without ever telling you what to do. They simply hand you the glasses, and you do the rest. To reclaim your mind, you must learn to recognize the frames and, occasionally, have the courage to break the glass. You have reached the final layer of the architecture, the place where all the other biases come to rest and find their justification. You might think that, as you've listened to these descriptions of manipulation, you've been objectively weighing the evidence. You believe you are the kind of person who changes their mind when presented with new facts, but the reality is far more unsettling. Your brain is not a scientist seeking the truth. It is a lawyer seeking a win. It actively patrols the borders of your identity, waving through any information that matches what you already believe and aggressively interrogating, or simply ignoring, anything that threatens your worldview. This is the confirmation loop, the process by which your brain filters reality to protect its own comfortable delusions. You seek the echo that silences your doubt, because the alternative, the feeling of being wrong, is a psychological wound your ego cannot afford to sustain. The confirmation bias is a mainstream psychological fact, and perhaps the most pervasive of all human cognitive failures. It describes our tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms our preconceptions. When you see a news headline that aligns with your political stance, you likely click share without a second thought. But when you see one that challenges it, you suddenly become a rigorous investigative journalist, looking for flaws in the methodology, the funding, or the author's character. This isn't a conscious choice. It is a subconscious filtering system. Your System 1 brain categorizes information as friendly or hostile before your System 2 even has a chance to read the first paragraph. There is a surprising hidden behavior insight in what is known as the backfire effect. When people are presented with evidence that contradicts their deepest beliefs, they don't just ignore the evidence. They often end up believing their original delusion even more strongly. The corrective information is perceived as an attack, triggering a fight-or-flight response in the amygdala. Your brain treats a challenge to your opinion as a physical threat to your person. To defend itself, it doubles down, reinforcing the neural pathways of the existing belief. You aren't just stuck in your ways. You are actively digging a deeper trench every time someone tries to pull you out. Maybe this is happening to you right now. As we've discussed how other people control your thinking, you've likely thought of dozens of examples of how this applies to those other people. The ones on the opposite side of the aisle, the ones who follow different influencers, or the ones you consider less awake than you. But how many times did you stop to consider where your anchors were dropped? How many times did you question the frames you inhabit? Psychologists still debate whether the confirmation loop is a bug caused by our need for internal consistency or a feature designed to keep social groups unified by a shared narrative. Regardless, it ensures that your mind is a fortress where the truth is only allowed in if it's wearing a familiar uniform. Remember that false certainty from earlier, the way the anchoring trap gave you a baseline. The confirmation loop is the glue that keeps the anchor in place. It's why, once a first impression is formed, it is nearly impossible to change. We spend the rest of the relationship looking for behaviors that confirm our initial judgment and dismissing everything else as an exception. This is the uncomfortable truth behind human behavior. We are remarkably resistant to the reality that contradicts our story. We would rather be comfortably wrong than painfully corrected. The invisible mental traps are self-sealing. Once you are inside, your own logic becomes the lock. This is the philosophy of human nature at its most isolated. We are all living in filter bubbles of our own construction, reinforced by algorithms that know our biases better than we do. But the algorithms didn't invent the bubble, they just automated it. The need for an echo chamber is a fundamental human drive. We assume our social circle reflects the general consensus, but the social proof we rely on is just a mirror of our own curation. We trust the echo because it sounds like us, and we assume that because it is loud, it must be true. Maybe this is happening to you right now. You trust your intuition to tell you what is right. You ignore the fact that intuition is often just the resonance of your own biases reflecting back at you. The architecture of your mind is designed to minimize cognitive dissonance, the mental stress of holding two conflicting beliefs. To avoid this stress, you will rewrite your own history, forget your own mistakes, and vilify anyone who holds a different lens. You assume you are the hero of a story about the search for truth, but you might just be the protagonist of a story about the maintenance of an illusion. As you sit there, the hum of the fan still steady in the background, ask yourself, when was the last time you were genuinely, embarrassingly wrong about something that mattered? If you can't remember, it's not because you are infallible. It's because your confirmation loop is working perfectly. It has scrubbed the records. It has reframed your failures and anchored your successes. The mind is not always your ally, especially when it's protecting you from the growth that only comes through the discomfort of being wrong. The invisible architecture of the human mind is a masterpiece of efficiency and a tragedy of narrowness. We have walked through the 7 ways other people and your own biology control your thinking. From the first anchor dropped in your subconscious to the final echo of the confirmation loop, you have seen how your autonomy is eroded by the quiet suggestions of the world. But to see the architecture is to begin to find the exit. You cannot escape your biology, but you can learn to recognize the strings. You can choose to pause when you feel the spike of urgency from a scarcity trigger. You can choose to question the uniform of the authority figure. You can choose to look for the frame that wasn't used. The mind is not always your ally. Sometimes, the greatest illusion is believing you were ever fully in control. As the silence returns to the room, let the weight of these realizations settle. The world is a complex web of influences, many of them designed to bypass your awareness and speak directly to the ancient, fearful, and social parts of your brain. You are not a machine, but you are a biological entity that can be programmed if you leave the code unattended. True freedom is not the absence of influence. That is impossible in a social world. True freedom is the awareness of it. It is the quiet, persistent effort to look behind the curtain of your own thoughts and ask, is this me, or is this the echo of someone else? It is an exhausting journey, and there is no final destination where you are perfectly objective. There is only the continuous practice of doubt, the willingness to be uncomfortable, and the courage to admit that you are and will always be a work in progress. Sleep now, or perhaps just sit in the quiet for a while longer. The world will be there in the morning, filled with its anchors, its crowds, and its frames. But perhaps, when you step back out into it, you will move a little more slowly. You will watch the strings. And in that half-second of hesitation before you comply, before you agree, or before you judge, you will find the only part of you that is truly, undeniably yours.